the beginning, this project was envisioned as a landscape archaeology project where we want to see how the people lived on the land and how that changed over time, from the first Neolithic inhabitants of this area right up through Ottoman times and all of the phases in between.
Tundzha Regional Archaeological Project is an approach to the archaeological landscapes in the Tundzha River watershed from the non-destructive point of view. So through the surface survey, through a myriad of different paleoecological approaches, through remote sensing, different approaches that basically do not touch deeper than the surface.
Surface survey, which is our main research technique, of course, has its limitations in that we can't always determine things with the chronological precision that we'd like to, but on the other hand, it does give us a really good overview of where people were living and how they were living at any given point in time and how that changed over time. And we can get later also a surface survey makes a good initial research strategy, because later we can always come back and try to look at smaller areas more intensely through excavation and other techniques.
There's a soft, chalky, pinkish fabric that's used for Roman storage vessels, and it could be that. Or it could be something relatively modern. Yeah, when I say modern, I don't mean last week, but it's, your grandmother's yogurt bowl or, something like that. We're going to see how much of this large green field here we can get. So what we're going to do now, we're all lined up at our intervals. We're covering units of the fields that are 100 meters wide, 100 meters long, with 6 people on each unit. So each volunteer is responsible for about a 16 to 17 meter wide strip. It's best to use the PDA to keep track of the spatial component of what we're doing. It's much easier to draw a polygon on the satellite image in the field with our position marked than it is to take, say, a track log with a GPS, or even waypoints at the beginning and the ends of unit with a GPS, and then have to draw it all in at the base. It's really time consuming.
Archaeology's come a long way from Heinrich Schliemann and treasure hunters. So yeah, using the GPS I think is pretty normal, and inputting that into a program called GIS, ArcGIS, where you map out from satellite images what the polygons look like.
All right, go. So we've just made 2 passes on the field, and we've got 12 units done of about 1 hectare each. We try to do about 60 units a day. So we'll see if we make our goal today. There's been a pretty typical background scatter, what we call background scatter. People have been living here for 7,000 years, and so there's a certain amount of ceramics and other debris that have accumulated. We put these areas of the areas of the shard scatters into our GIS, and then what we need to do is determine the date of the scatters, and we can look at the sites, the surface concentrations from the Roman or Thracian period, and we can see how far apart these villages are spaced, roughly how large they are. So it's the difference between cities, towns, and villages.
Excavation's inherently destructive. It needs to be done. It's the only way that you're really going to learn a lot about any given site. But for a regional scale project like this, we can learn a great deal from the surface survey, from the remote sensing, from the paleoecology about ancient environments, without damaging the archaeological record. And in fact, recording a great deal of the archaeological record for cultural heritage management purposes.
The project has kind of taken archaeology to a different kind of perspective to what's traditionally been done in Bulgaria, because most of what's been done in the past has been excavations of particular archaeological sites. But the TRAP project's kind of looking at things in a more landscape kind of perspective. Where were people in the past? Where did they focus their activities? All that kind of stuff. So by knowing what the landscape was like, when were people cutting down trees, all that kind of thing, then we get a better kind of handle on past activities,
Simon is a palynologist, which means that he studies past environments using mainly pollen records as a proxy. Let's say you've got a lake in the Tundzha Valley. Whenever you're bringing sediment into the lake, which is a normal continual process, that'll settle out at the bottom of the lake and incorporate lots of information in it. Organic matter that lives in the lake and dies will sink to the bottom. Everything gets incorporated in the sediments.
Well, we're here at a place called Scala Lake, and we've got a couple of boats and a few bits of wood, and we're going to do a bit of coring. So we've got a bit of equipment that we're going to use to suck a bit of sediment out of the bottom of the lake, and that's more or less the plan. Got a bit of wind, so we'll see how we go. Yeah.
Because pollen is dispersed through wind and a whole heap of processes, is actually a long distance transport. Say if we found a pollen record in the reservoir near Cousin Lake, it wouldn't be indicative of just a few square kilometres around it. It would be indicative of hundreds of square kilometres around it because of the dispersion of pollen.
Is this the sample you've got here?
Yeah, it should be inside, but you never really know until you've squeezed it out of the tube. So this is the moment of truth. So
just want to hold it?
Hold it very still, and what will happen is the sediment will start to come out the end, and the sediment should go into this this tube. Okay, so the tube will move back, the sediment should come out.
Yeah.
So it looks good. We'll try for another one to see if we can attach another meter onto the bottom there, and then I think we'll have a decent core. Well, once we get back to the lab, then we can section it open and see the stratigraphic changes, so changes in colour, or there might be shells in there that tell us something about the environment. But what I do is I look for the grains of pollen that are preserved in there, because pollen kind of floats around. There's a lot of it in the atmosphere at any given time, and it's one of the most useful bits of evidence for how environments were in the past. Over here we've got a bunch of pine trees and oak trees, so we'd expect that there'd be a fair bit of pine and oak pollen in the surface sediments here, and if we go back in time, then the composition of those things might change. And so if there were more oak trees in the past, we know that there'd be more oak pollen in the sediments.
Also, in the vegetation record and the pollen record, you'll be able to find changes due to agriculture. So instead of just climatic swings causing vegetation change, in the last few thousand years you will have human-induced vegetation changes.
So your makeshift vessel didn't let you down?
No, it works like a charm.
Yep, that's good.
Yeah, you can see very clearly the impact of humans. First thing that disappears is the tree pollen declines very rapidly. You get a lot of charcoal in the sediment from fires that people were burning to clear this vegetation. And you also then get direct evidence of the people through things like the pollen of wheat and barley and other crops, agricultural weeds. You also get these funny little fungal spores, little things that only grow in cattle dung or things like that. So they pop up in the record as well. So yeah, there's lots of different ways we can do this, and other workers can look at changes in the chemistry in the sediment and other things.
Right, stop.
As far as this work that I've been doing goes, we're quite interested to know how, for example, the deforestation of the plains area, how does that tie into the archaeology? Was there some big cultural event that occurred at that time? Was there an invasion? Was there a drought? Was there something that caused this massive environmental change? That was a nice core. We know there have been people here for, thousands of years, but at some point they decided that the oak forests that they lived in were no longer required and got rid of them. So, yeah, what caused that change? So these are the sort of questions we're looking at.
A lot of these areas in central Bulgaria had been written off as too disrupted by land reclamation efforts between World War I and World War II, and then especially under the communists. But there was very aggressive amelioration and reclamation projects. It seemed like that the communists never had a river that was too small to dam or a wetland that was too small to drain, and there was a great deal of this kind of disruption. And most of the Bulgarian paleoecologists had just said, you know, you're not going to get anything. You're not going to find, you're going to get records that are 50 years long, or it's all going to be out of sequence because it's been disrupted. There's a lot to be learned here by applying the techniques that have been developed over the last 40 years elsewhere in the world, the techniques that are associated with processual archaeology. We got here and we found out that there was a lot of this basic archaeological research that wasn't being done, or if it was being done, it's not being published in Western languages and Western outlets. Speaking as someone who was trained as a Greek historian, I mean the Central and Northern Balkans, Bulgaria, it's mostly terra incognita to Greek historians. I mean, we learn a lot about the Mediterranean and a lot about the Near East and a lot about Anatolia and nothing about Thrace.
Thracians fit in because they basically occupy one of those time slices in the diachronic span of the project. So why do we focus on them in particular? It's mainly because they are a high-profile topic in Bulgaria, and being that, they have been mainly studied through very traditional approaches. So partially we are trying to break through that established conventional interpretation, that, you know, and through the traditional approaches that have kind of stymied the application of newer methods to this particular period, which is the first millennium BC. Prehistorians in Bulgaria have always been communicating with prehistorians in Europe in general, so the methodologies there are slightly better, they're more open, while in this classical period, basically, the use of survey has been minimal to answer some of the questions that people ask of the Thracians. So I was in particularly interested in applying it to the Thracian period and see how our interpretations will change on the basis of this surface survey data.
In this study area, of the two study areas that we have, the Thracian remains or ruins are really dominant. I mean, even sitting up here, we could probably, on a clear day, we could probably count 24, 3 large burial mounds. And this area was intensely occupied in the Thracian, Hellenistic, and Roman period. And even down into the Hellenistic and Roman period, there are a lot of Thracian cultural practices like burials in mounds that continue, that are adopted by the Greeks and Romans, Macedonians who settle here.
They're the most distinctive archaeological feature in Bulgaria, are these burial mounds. The oldest ones go back to the Bronze Age, so that would be, say, back to the Middle Bronze Age, maybe 2000 to 1600 BC. Are the oldest ones, but they're most common in the early Iron Age, say 1100 to 600, the Thracian period, 600 to 300. The Hellenistic period begins with Alexander the Great's father, Philip of Macedon, conquers Thrace, and that really brings the Thracians into the Greco-Macedonian world. They'd been trading and dealing with the Greeks for hundreds of years before then. Parts of Thrace were conquered by the Persians. I mean, they'd been part of Mediterranean affairs for some time, but Alexander's father conquers them, and with Alexander's death, that's usually taken as the beginning of what's called the Hellenistic period. So that's about 300 down to 70 BC. 70 BC, the Romans show up. When the Romans settled here, they adopted the indigenous burial practices and started burying themselves in mounds. I mean, there was a lot of exchange between the Romans, cultural exchange between the Romans and the Thracians, the local people here.
I'm just digging the hole. It should be like 20 to 30 centimeters deep, and I'll take a sample for a geologist, and we will try to figure out about erosion on this mound. So which means that how it was big when it was built, or high, let's say. These are burial mounds from different periods, but in this area they are usually from the Thracian period. So it means like the golden age was in the 5th century BC.
And what's in it?
Well, if it's a rich mound, there is a chamber and some gold and masks and stuff like this.
And Shawn was mentioning that a lot of them get plundered.
Yes.
Is that a real problem?
Yeah, it's a big problem actually, because these are like in the middle of the fields and people just plow them. And I think that, like we cannot find out if they were robbed before or not, but yeah, I think it's most probable that they were robbed.
So just some sort of indication of the extent of that. Is there any sort of percentage of the number that have been plundered?
Well, that's what I'm trying to figure out actually. How many of them are disappearing like during the time? Because I use like old topographical maps from 1940 to 1960, where the mounds are marked. These are like old Russian maps, and yeah. Now I'm trying to find out how many of them actually disappear. Misha is taking care of the paper forms, which means that she has to describe the mound, all the things which are then put into Excel sheets actually, and which we need for the GIS database are written here in the paper forms. Oscar is looking for the mounds in PDA, he's actually like navigating all the team. And yes, I'm just taking care of them, taking pictures.
I'm recording the number of the mound and everything we need to know for the database. So we verified that this is real mound and the CRM urgency, which means if there are a lot of rubber trenches or not, the land use, the visibility, should it be excavated and studied more, of course the dimensions and the description of the mound. That's basically it.
And that goes back into
the big database back in the office. So we record it and then we put it on the map, and we can make all other kinds of studies based on this information.
and you can link it all up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Vara, I noticed the mounds are all different sizes. What does that indicate?
Well, it could indicate different periods or different importance of the person who was actually buried in.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Most probable, like the second.
How much manpower would be brought to make one of these?
Depends. Well, the mounds are varying between 10 meters to 50 meters in diameter, so it depends really. But a huge mound could be built like a year. Yeah, it's a perfect example of a fresh trench. It's not older than 1 month. So they just checked if there is something in this direction.
But they don't go too far.
Yeah, well, depends. Maybe somebody disturbed them or they just got tired. I think that they are just like working more and more because they know that they can find something.
Yeah.
So it would be really good when the government takes care of the mounds and saves something what's in actually, because it's like cultural heritage. So
What is their attitude to the cultural heritage of the area?
well, now it's really, yeah, it's very difficult. They have a lot of mounds and they don't have actually like how to guard them, or it's very actually like it's a very touchy question. You know what to do with it, because there is in each region like 1,000 mounds, and you need a huge manpower if you want to guard each of the mount. Or yeah, there is no system how to solve this problem. Now we are entering the actually mound of Celtes III. We are in the Dromos right now, which is 13 meters long. And as you can see, somewhere here are the details of the wooden construction which actually held the Dromos. It's here. And this is one of the biggest mounds in Kazanlak Valley. It's about 30 meters high, And now we entered the first antechamber where the horse was buried. You can see it has very typical ceiling built from granite rocks. And this is the second antechamber where when you turn you can see the doors, which are actually like an imitation of wooden doors, but made from marble.
So in the final little area in here, so going right through, what's in here, Bara?
There's the place where King Xerxes was buried.
I think that it is important that museum have to take care of all different monuments here in the valley. You know about the tombs, but also other artifacts here. We not only expose and show to the visitors, but also we take care with restoration and conservation. So this is the main purpose of the museum, like a protector. So now we are in the room where we can show to our visitors some of the most interesting and valuable artifacts from one of our tombs. The name of the tumulus that we excavate these items is Голяма Косматка, and the tomb belonged to one of the famousest Thracian rulers. His name was Seftus III. So here in front of us we can see his funeral golden wreath. In Thracian society, the wreath is a symbol of king's power. It is instead of the crown. Also because you know that the Thracian ruler also stay ahead of the army. So here you can see another very interesting artifact. These greaves, they are protectors for the legs, and the most important, on each knee there is a face of Athena. You know that she was a goddess not only of wisdom but also of war. So she was like a protector and guardian for the warrior, for the king. And maybe the third one of the artifacts, this is a handle of his battle sword. You can see that it's in form of head of an eagle, and also it was decorated with many small golden pieces.
The difference for this mount is that it's a settlement mount, it's not a burial one. It was a Neolithic settlement, and it was occupied for many years, like thousands of years actually. And it's in private property, so unfortunately it's a little bit destroyed. The superficial layer is destroyed, but hopefully we will recommend to be studied, and they will excavate it, because here we can find outlines of dwellings and ceramics and many interesting things. Obviously, if we have a settlement mount here that tall, it means that here the living conditions were really good, and it's typical for the valley actually. Hopefully we can find like all the stratigraphy and see different periods of occupation and understand what happened exactly here. We have multiple layers of occupational phases, we call them. Like one settlement, then after generations it was destroyed and built over again. And it becomes like this big. It means that long time ago people have lived here. That's the reason it looks like a mound actually.
So it's layers of life.
Yeah, layers of life, different generations, ancient generations here.
Would you like to be involved in further excavation?
Yeah, I'll be really happy. I am prehistorian, so of course, if it's Neolithic, set me in. I mean.
You'd be ready to go.
Yeah, I'm ready to go.
Telling people you're a geologist seems to work.
We had a great experience. We're in this.
Everything goes on here, and everything starts and ends here. From what happens in the field, and basically having over 20 people just between 3 bases and having 6 teams in the field doing different kinds of field work has required basically a coordinator. So I have decided this year to just spend most of my time in the office so that I can make all the other teams run more smoothly, and then I can provide real-time feedback to all the teams so that they can keep going out and finding new information. First in the morning is the preparation, and it's not only in the morning, it's the night before. We look at the maps, we print the maps where the teams should go, we highlight the features or archaeological places of interest where I want the teams to either go and survey or go and do ground control. So these features come up from either the legacy data database, or they've been left to us by the Bulgarian teams who said, there were a couple interesting spots that we heard, from local people that we were kind of aimed at. Go and check them. Or it is some sites of ours that I have found out that our database was not either accurate or complete. So we fill in these old records. All the team leaders or team captains sit down at the computers, look at their particular maps. I have ArcMap documents for each of the teams where they monitor their progress.
I need to finish this map, so I'm just looking what we didn't, which mounts we didn't visit yesterday, and we need to visit them today.
All of these teams work with PDAs and little manual computers that they enter data into. So I need to make sure that their digital files are all updated every day. And I check this data out of my database every morning. And the team leaders need to come here before everybody else to check that their PDAs read this data properly, that everything displays, that they can find the maps they need, and that they have all the information they will need in the field during the day, that they can find it in the PDA in the morning. And if something happens and the particular data layer is missing, I can at least immediately load it back in. I can troubleshoot in the morning. At 4 p.m. they usually come back, and again the procedure is such that first the team leaders give me the cards, their memory cards from the PDAs, and I download all the data. I check it for, does it exist, I check whether any problems happened in the field, whether we have all the digital data. I download it, and students start filling in into the database the information that was entered into paper forms, that was not digitized in the field. So then the students also download pictures from the field, they write their diaries, and they enter information about the survey progress and kind of the sites, or again these interesting find spots that they had encountered. So there's about 4 different types of documentation that happen. And this takes about 2 to 3 hours, depending on what time the teams come. Usually it's that the whole horde comes all at once, and then it's a giant chaos and people fight over computers a little bit. The GIS database, it is set up on the server, and I have the team set up in individual geodatabases, so they can actually work simultaneously, all of them. So I'm very happy with the server and with using the geodatabase, because it allows multiple teams downloading and processing their data at the same time. And it has sped up the work so much that most of the teams are done with their documentation before dinner.
You've got the field work, which is actually only half of the work, and then to see the technological side as well, it just gives you a better understanding of, in terms of the practice of archaeology and stuff like that, because everyone has that presumption that we just go digging holes or something like that, but there's a lot more to it. So for me, it's given me a wider understanding of that it's a lot more to it and a lot more work.
Everyone is involved in almost every aspect of the project.
Definitely the application of theory into practice, that's the big thing.
What is satellite remote sensing?
It's pretty much where you look at satellite images, and I can't remember what the colour thing's called.
Oh, don't worry about the details of the bands and stuff.
You look at satellite images to see if there's any crop marks, soil marks, any objects above the ground, below the ground, just so you can go and find them.
Because that makes sense then.
Remote sensing has been mainly used to find pyramids in the forests in Yucatan and Mexico. I guess in Australia one of the most famous projects is Angkor Wat by the University of Sydney, where they have actually a nice project developed looking at palaces of the city in the satellite image. And basically The remote sensing has been used in a way where people knew there were features on the ground and they looked at the image and they said, oh, it's also on the image. Look, we found it. What we try to do, we scrutinize the image for anything that reminds us of an archaeological feature, and then we go on the ground, we walk the ground and we see what are the success rates of this sort of work, and how many times do we actually hit an archaeological site, and how many archaeological sites do we miss. And we try to do remote sensing in a quantified and more objective manner. So there is an existing mound, there is another existing mound, and there are a couple that existed some time ago, maybe at the beginning of the 20th century, but since have been destroyed. So satellite images allow us to pull in even such information.
Remote sensing won't pick up as many archaeological remains as pedestrian survey will, but it'll pick up some of them, and we use that to extend the area that we've evaluated beyond what we have time to do with pedestrian survey.
In this case, I had seen this feature in the image and I sent a team in there, and they collected this particular round one, which I said, no, that's actually pretty odd to have it in the middle of the field. And we had found an early Iron Age site in there with a early Bronze Age predecessor beneath it.
This is all of them so far. We've got to do everything around the edge. We have to review. We're going to send all the ground control teams out to find trees. That's what we're going to do.
We'll tell them they're
Don't be mean.
It's exciting, really, it is. Here we are covering the huge necropolis, which is a huge field with hundreds of mounds, burial mounds probably. And we are not sure about its datation, maybe Thracian, maybe Roman. We can compare it with nowadays cemeteries. My personal opinion is that these are like normal burials for the normal people, actually, like you and me.
So if you started lifting back the layers of this, you would actually get a good indication of the way just the general person lived their lives? Would it give some sort of indication?
If there are any finds, that's the problem. I'm not sure they are, actually, because a lot of them were robbed and a lot of them were just plowed over. Here it's quite complicated because only the bigger mounds are visible from the satellite image. And these small piles of stones, they are pretty much invisible because sometimes they are under the tree. Usually you find a lot more in the field during the field work than on the satellite image. And actually the satellite image is like 10 years old or something. So some of the mounds could be robbed, destroyed or whatever. It's a unique project because a lot of fields are incorporated into one multidisciplinary project, I would say, and I can work with different people from different departments, and it's really interesting and meet new people. Yeah, it's wonderful.
It must make you a better researcher, working with all these different people.
Yeah, and you have to lead people if it's possible. Yeah, the technology helps us do it systematically because, like, for example, the survey in Bulgaria was done before, but not systematically. They were just walking through the fields and finding stuff. They actually didn't mark what was done. Like, a lot of mounds were excavated and we don't have any diaries, any information about it.
The front code's 3357 for that one, and for this one here,
so we are trying to leave something for the future generation and trying to record what was going on, what happened in the past in this area.
With some scientific rigour.
Yeah.
I mean, we know that Southopolis is, you know, major capital, if you want to call it that, royal seat anyway, is in the center of this valley, and there's a great deal of interest in finding what were the predecessors to that major, you know, Hellenistic settlement at Southopolis. So that's a major research question, I think, for just about anybody who works in this valley.
Wow, it's about 1.5 degrees today for our viewers at home.
With wind chill, it's -5 probably.
Yeah, it is not warm today. We are going to survey the normal way with that, starting here along this road and back and forth. But it's extensive. We're just looking for mounds.
So, what do I mark it?
You know, from looking at the satellite image, we thought there were 30 mounds, and we registered over 100 in a day, and it wasn't systematic enough. So now we're going back. We've got all of our old records in the PDAs, and we're going to go back and really make sure that we've got everything, because we want a complete map of this necropolis. We estimate that now that we've reevaluated the satellite image in light of what we learned the last time we were out here, we figure there may be 150 mounds in this necropolis. Most of them are very small. A lot of these mounds are at the lower boundary of what we can expect to sense with the imagery that we have. You know, they're mounds that are 5 meters, 7 meters, 10 meters across, and 20, 30, 50 centimeters high. And we'll get a good idea of what our lower limit is in detecting mounds.
When you were looking at the remote imaging yesterday, what were you seeing that for this area?
We were seeing some croft and soil marks that we think indicate mounds. Because the mounds are quite they're built partly out of stone, and plants don't grow so well on them, and sometimes you can actually see the stones in the image, like the mound that the other team is standing on right now. You can see it's quite stony, and sometimes you can see that in the image. Because the stone here is lighter than the soil is, and sometimes you just see a crop mark of unhealthy vegetation or less vigorous vegetation because the mounds are so stony. Sometimes with the real key feature in many cases is there's a small robber's trench in the top of the mound that collects some soil and moisture, and you'll get a little bit of vigorous growth. Then around that, an area of poor growth, and so you get this sort of bullseye on the landscape we've identified some of those, some that are just negative crop marks where the vegetation is not very healthy, and we spent some time looking at what the known mounds look like in the image, and then, you know, trying to find other similar features that we think also represent mounds. We hope in the next maybe 2 to 3 today and an additional 1 or 2 days to get this entire necropolis mapped.
These look nice in the forest down here, as opposed to just walking through.
We're essentially creating a model showing the relationship between soil properties and archaeological relics and where people are living and settling.
And other landscape features as well, so vegetation, hydrology, streams, things like that. So resources like timber, water, and stable places for agriculture and settlement like that.
And also using what the land looks like now to sort of like model backwards and see what things used to be like back when, in the time period that the archaeological work is focusing on.
Erosion and human land use and things like that all alter the landscape, not just in terms of clearing vegetation, but also erosion will change the shape of the landscape. So if we wind that back a few thousand years, we'll be able to get a very good idea of how things looked when the Thracians were around.
Okay. Oh, God, that's...
The time-consuming part of our work is getting to a site. So once we get to a site, we really don't want to have to go back.
We might be working just here, I think. We have these little things which are called PDAs, and you can basically load all sorts of maps onto it. So you can put geology on there, you can put satellite photos, lakes, rivers, roads, and that kind of thing. And so when we worked out our random points, which are all across the entire valley, we've then put them on here, and we're basically driving towards them, stopping as close as we can, and then walking through this, sometimes fields, all sorts of things to get there. all the points are random, and so we don't like choose easy sites to do. We just do a completely random sample, and these things are really great for helping us get exactly where we want. It also lets you add and enter the data as you go. So while there's paper, which is a backup, you can enter the data directly for each site you go to, which means that it saves a lot of time in having to enter the data later by hand and that kind of thing.
The map is live, so as we're entering the data, Robbie's changing some of it so that we can really easily see the areas we've mapped. They change to little green circles.
We're also keeping a paper record of everything that we find in the field, just in case we have a big technology fail. And we're also keeping waypoints in our GPS and marking them as we go.
So we put 1 kilometre grid cells across the entire Kazanlak Valley, and then Robbie got the computer program that we use to put random points inside each square so that we get a representative sample of the natural landscape. We'll take a few readings in the field in terms of land use, vegetation, elevation.
Nice to get some natural soil.
Oh wow, really rocky. The soil, actually, we just have a look at it, see whether it's rocky or sandy or clay, what it would be likely to be used for. Take a sample, take a photo record of it, and take the sample back to base for more chemical analysis. So we've got a bit of backlog of work for when it starts snowing.
That's okay, we'll go back and we'll do a definitive test.
That's not going to work.
Each one is catalogued, so every site we go to has a unique identification number. We just date it in a way that's really unambiguous, and KGP just stands for Kazanlak Geoscience Project. So we don't get our soil samples confused with any other projects.
And that number 047 corresponds to a coordinate that Robbie's got on the map.
In the PDA, yeah.
So we know exactly where it was taken, when it was taken.
The more thorough we are now, the more work it saves later on, and the better our results will be.
You can imagine back in Thracian times when there wasn't so many people around and you had the pick of all the best places to live, you'd probably live in the best place. So that would be somewhere with fertile soils, flat land, access to timber resources.
Fresh water nearby.
Fresh water, good cropping regions, things like that. And they're the kind of things that we are hoping to build in one of our models.
And find out where those conditions existed.
And the other good thing about this one is that we've got a wealth of archaeological data from many years around Kazanlak. So we can then look at what our map produces and try and find correlations between where the archaeologists are finding most of their archaeological sites and the landscape characteristics of those places. So hopefully then we'll be able to use that in Kazanlak, in the Tundzha Valley, and hopefully the whole of Bulgaria as well.
Yeah, so we use our correlation as a predictor, essentially. It's an excellent application of very different disciplines coming together.
Well, relatively.
Looks very sandy.
Yeah. So this all looks quite strange to do this here, but each one of these bags represents 1 point in the 200 square kilometres of the valley that we've sampled, and then by knowing specific details about each point for every square kilometre, you can interpolate, which is basically filling in the gaps. So it's for this kind of survey, it's quite high density, 1 sample per square kilometre, and combining that with lots of remotely sensed data and other mapped data, you can then do, I would hope, a really accurate reconstruction of environments and vegetation.
Geology often is concerned with things that are long time ago, whereas archaeology, what they think is a long time ago, geologists think is in the blink of an eye. But certainly there's a lot that they can offer each other in terms of expanding on each other's knowledge.
It's been mostly field work up to this point. And yeah, so the next few weeks, all we need is 1 laptop and a few days to work on the data, and that will get us what we want, I think. We're going to be using all this data to make some mass maps of soils throughout the valley, and then use that to model erosion and things like that.
Us being relatively junior researchers, we are happy giving opportunities to others. So that's why we have a crew of geology students trying, to take their stab at the local geology and soil studies, and have their own say and see whether their methodology would work and what can it contribute to archaeology in Bulgaria.
the best archaeological projects, at least in my opinion, are the ones that are multidisciplinary like this. And in the future, I think there's going to be more and more of this kind of multidisciplinary work, which really started in the late 50s, early 60s, but in a small way, and then has spread since then. And I think it's important for the students to see that, because whether you're talking about applying for academic research grants or working in consulting archaeology in Australia, it's increasingly multidisciplinary, and there's the expectation, if you want to be successful in grant applications, or if you want to develop a well-respected consultancy, to have this range of tools at your disposal.
This gives you some extra skills that you normally wouldn't. Gives you an edge. Yeah, like I want to be an archaeologist. Like that's my degree, and having those skills now is a very good thing, because I can get further in a short amount of time. I'll have the skills they need on a project in the future, whereas other people who may not have done undergrad like work experience will not have that.
Doing this has been one of those experiences that you just can't miss, and I'm happy to study late at night and get no sleep in exchange for getting practical experience doing this.
ArcGIS, there's software that basically helps us, that houses most of the data of the TRAP project and helps us visualize it. What ArcGIS stands for is basically, it's a geographic information system that is a container for archaeological data. The ArcGIS software has 3 modules, one of which is this ArcMap module, which visualizes most of the data and lets us see immediately the results of the analyses or the different types of data that we have. It puts it on a map and lets us explore it visually.
Greeks don't write much about the Thracians. They really didn't care much about Thracians in the literature, because there was no need to mention Thracians, because everybody knew who they were. And that's problematic for us, because we don't know what the society was actually like. We know from that inscription that there was Thracian ruler, like king, and he has some sort of co-rulers. The king was the main person, and they had to obey the king. But it's hard to tell, because we know it only from this inscription. We don't know any other source who mention like the organization of the state.
So that is really the only existing document?
Actually, yes. Yes. There are 2 different kinds of Thracians, like the wild ones, and they were told to be ferocious and warlike. Some of them served as mercenaries, even during Persian wars, during Peloponnesian wars, and the one Hellenized. The Hellenized Thracians cooperated with Greeks, and they really had no trouble with them. So I think they just merged together these 2 societies. I think that's why they used Greek and Greek language as an official language, for example, for the inscriptions, for the publication of important treaties, because that was what they saw doing Greeks. So they just copied their habits. Okay. It's easier for them.
Yeah. What happened to the Thracians
I think they were just assimilated first by Macedonians, then by Romans, but still they were Hellenized during centuries. Again, there's a lack of sources, so we don't know what happened to them, whether they were eliminated or I don't know.
From what I'm sort of hearing from a number of people, it seems to me that really the Thracians as a civilization, they've sort of slipped through the historical record of the antiquities.
Yeah, that's
to some extent, How do you think the TRAP project could help to remedy this?
I think the main problem is the definition of Thracians. I think this project is trying to define
what the society was during the antiquity, during the first millennium BC, which, let's say, it wasn't done properly, and it could help us really to know how the society was organized, how the spatial organization of the society was, and that is really interesting. And so far we don't know much about that, and we can combine it with other data.
With the fact that it's actually there's a hole in the knowledge base there, what you're doing really is quite important work.
Yes, I think so.
So now we are at the entrance to the Kazanlak tomb, and if we walk in the dromos, you can see here frescoes which are depicted to the man who was buried inside, and you can see an army on, and actually this like symbol of his power, because this is the army which is guarding his tomb. Probably it's his personal army. Yeah. And this is a central tomb which is painted, as you can see, and it's like the best example of early Hellenistic art, which is known in Bulgaria, and it's dated to the 4th or the break of the 4th and 3rd century. And yeah, about the mound, it's actually we are in a replica of the mound, because the mound was found in 1944, and as many people entered, the frescoes started to fall apart. So they built, but the replica is very true. Here in the central dome, here is the man who was probably buried here, but the tomb was robbed, so actually no body or something like this was found here. Only a couple of bones and some pottery, and a couple of like small things which left here actually after the robbery. But nothing like in the previous one with a whole coffin or something. So here you can see the man who was buried here, his wife, and actually people around who are bringing offerings him. And above this smaller frieze, there is a carriage, or there are 3 carriages with horses, and it belongs to the special Thracian tradition, where they always took the body of the person and traveled around their land, actually, and they did it for a couple of days, and after that they buried the body.
The end goal for all of this is to really reconstruct what the environment was like and how it's changed. To understand how people lived here, we need to understand their environment, and the paleoecology is helping with that. The geology crew that's out now is also helping with geological changes, so that will complement the vegetation changes that the paleoecology tells us about, and that will give us a regional picture of what vegetation and climate was like. Then we can combine that with the surface survey and remote sensing to get an idea of what settlement and mortuary patterns were, how habitation was distributed on the landscape and how that changed over time. And by putting these things together, we hope to be able to reconstruct what kind of strategies were people used to survive here. How important was pastoralism? How important was sedentary farming, where they really just sit in one place and farm for a long period of time and have strategies for renewing the land, like manuring and things like this? Or to what extent was agriculture more mobile, that they'd farm someplace for a while until they exhausted the soil and just move on to the next place? That there are many different strategies for agriculture that might, and subsistence more generally, that might work here, and we want to see which ones were used when, how they changed over time, why they might have changed when they did. It's that bigger picture of how people lived in this environment that we're really interested in.
Вашата помощ е от изключително значение. Първо, най-малкото защото чисто като знания и технологични умения, нали, вие ни помагате, защото ние нямаме тази техника. Второто, което според мен е важно, че вие сте много голям и много добре организиран екип, който работи добре и за кратко време всъщност получава изключително добри резултати. И третото, което всъщност е важно, че наистина вашата информация, освен от нас, музеи, музейни работници, всъщност ще се ползва и от тези след нас. Тоест, вие имате работа, която е важна за поколенията и след нас.
I don't know, we're trying to see what of these techniques can be applied to the Bulgarian archaeological record, which really hasn't been done consistently in the past.
И всъщност вашата дейност би била пример за археологическата карта на България, защото това е крайната цел, това, което вие правите, но вие сте еталона, по който всички останали части на България всъщност трябва да го направят. Това е вашия принос изобщо за българската археология.
If we're out, we're doing surface survey, and we find a scatter of 6th century BC shards, we really need at some point to excavate to see if there's really a 6th century BC village underneath that shard scatter, the way that we think that there is, that we kind of assume that there is when we're mapping these shard scatters. So we do need to switch now and do a little bit more excavation, I think, while continuing with the surface survey. On top of some of this basic research like this that we're doing, we are getting drawn back to some questions, some of the same questions that we had when we first came to Bulgaria in 2004, but also some new questions that we think are that could be very fruitful to investigate. We'd like to test the theory, for example, of how agriculture came to Europe. Right now, the evidence is pointing towards a scenario where agriculturalists left from Anatolia, sailed across the Aegean, set up shop in Thessaly, and then spread up the river valleys from Thessaly and wound up here or in southeast Bulgaria, 2,000 years after they left Anatolia, which is only a couple hundred kilometers away, 300 kilometers away. And even Ozdogan, the originator of this theory, who's an archaeologist himself, he's done some of his own original work, he's looked at other archaeologists' work. He admits that this seems to him a very unlikely scenario, but it's what all the evidence is pointing towards right now. And then the question is that because that's what the evidence really indicates, or is it just because some important evidence hasn't been discovered yet? And southeastern Bulgaria would be a good place to look for that. One of the premises of our project was that there's some data missing from Bulgaria, that we don't really have much information about the settlement patterns, about how people were living on the landscape. But on the other hand, there is a lot of evidence from Thrace. Archaeology has been going on there for over a century. There are the very impressive mortuary remains, the burial mounds that are the primary feature of Bulgarian archaeology, that seem to imply that there was a great deal of wealth, and that there was effective political control over large areas, that there was social stratification, that there were upper classes that could marshal this wealth and use it to produce these impressive monuments. On the other end, in addition to that, we also have written sources, and when we get to the written sources, it's almost a problem of having too many sources, too many contradictory sources. If we look at Book 2 out of Thucydides, he begins with a description of how large the empire of the Idrisians is, how far it extends. He goes on then to discuss how much tribute that they get, which was 400 talents of gold and silver, and an equal amount in what he calls gifts, in addition to cloth and other in-kind tribute, totaling about 800 talents. And he goes on to say that there's not only a king, but there are also lords and nobles, again perhaps implying this social stratification. And then we get on to the heart of his argument, where he says that the Idrisian kingdom, was thus a very powerful kingdom in revenue and general prosperity, surpassing all in Europe between the Ionian Gulf and the Black Sea, and in numbers and military resources coming in second only to the Scythians, who everyone recognized as the largest, most populous people in Europe. So we've got Thucydides on the one hand with this picture of a powerful kingdom, of wealth, of social stratification, of a great deal of manpower, revenues, resources that are being effectively controlled by an elite and a king. A stratified state-level society in modern anthropological terms. So then we can turn to another source, Demosthenes, who's writing about a century later, but a little less than that, but who gives us a very different picture. And this is in the context of some of Demosthenes' invectives against Philip of Macedon, the king of Macedon, who's just recently conquered Thrace. And Demosthenes wants to tell us about Philip, to say that if Philip was willing to conquer this, what he calls a wretched place up in Thrace with lousy weather, if he's willing to go up there and spend the winter living in what he calls a ruin of a place for the sake of the rye and the millet of the Thracian store pits. Rye and millet are low status foods. That if he's willing to do all of that for this worthless, Thracian land that he's been conquering, then surely he must be a threat to Athens, which is this real prize that's really worth taking in comparison to Thrace. So we've got these very contradictory pictures of Thrace from the written sources. And so now what we are trying to add to this mix to help interpret the contradictory written sources, the very impressive mortuary evidence, is the evidence from settlement archaeology.
What we haven't seen up till now in the archaeological evidence is what is happening below these elite classes. Thucydides, as an aristocratic historian, is not really interested in those people beneath the nobles. So what we were expecting when we came to Thrace, we were looking for some of these indexes of where this rest of the surplus is going. How can the Thracian elites actually generate such a large tribute? Where is it coming from? And how are they actually keeping their arche, their empire, together? Is it through the use of some political ideology and state art, or is it just purely through the use of violence and their military resources, which are another aspect of society that Thucydides underscores? So when looking for the origins of surplus, what we are looking for in our settlement archaeology approach is the easiest way to gain and reproduce your surplus is to tax your population. The larger population, the more surplus you will get. So what we were looking for in the landscape were these sedentary large populations that would live in centralized in cities and in villages and could be easily monitored, taxed, and policed by the military elites. And what we are looking for among these populations too is that we will have more other non-producing classes besides the elites. We will have administrators, bureaucrats, we will have craft specialists, blacksmiths, bakers, people who will have lots of types of jobs that indicate that this society is diversified, it is complex, and it can process a lot of information and can be centrally governed. And that would be the ideal picture of state-level society, such as Thucydides is suggesting. What we actually found when we came to Thrace and when we did our survey, we found a lot of small villages that didn't really warrant large populations. Most of the materials in these settlements were homogeneous. There was very little internal variability, suggesting we were not really getting much of this craft specialization or specialization of any other kind. So the picture that emerges from this settlement analysis is that we have a large homogeneous mass that is all producing this surplus for the small sliver of elites who are having the cities and the burial mounds built for them.
I really enjoy every season in here. I love to come back because it's wonderful country. And I am really glad to be part of this project.
You'll be sad when it ends.
Actually, I think it will never end. It's forever. Yeah.